Some of the ideas we had that came out of attending a seminar, the Better Work Initiative by WorkSafe, were around what we term front runners. And out of that thinking, we decided we wanted to profile people in the industry that were thinking creatively, that were problem solving, that were champions of industry, that were utilizing best practice. They weren't waiting for anybody to instruct them or tell them. They had, off their own initiative, implement certain policies. So we wanted to profile those people. We wanted to tell you about their creative problem solving, new tech industry champions, and basically people who are going above and beyond and leading the way. And that's why we called it front runners. So the first person we profiled in the series was Richard Broome, the Managing Director of Linesearch beforeUdig in the UK. And Richard shared with us kind of like the state of the nation of what was happening in the damage prevention industry in the UK, some of the challenges they had there, some of the initiatives, and in particular USAG, which is the Utility Strike Avoidance Group. Now that was formed by industry really, but driven by Linesearch beforeUdig, with the idea of gaining insights by acquiring data, consolidating it, and looking at mining it for empirical evidence of what was causing damages. Now, if you know what's causing damages, then you've got a better idea of how to combat that. And that was their driver. They wanted to really get to the bottom of what are the root causes or the contributing factors to damages, and how can we share those insights to help people implement best practice and ultimately reduce damages. So that's what we're here for. That's what we're all about. It was an interesting conversation. Richard has a swathe of experience, and it was really good to hear what was happening in the UK. So join us for the first Frontrunner series.
Hey, it's a real pleasure to talk to you, Richard. What are you, first up, I'm really keen to know what the challenges are in the UK. What are the challenges the industry's facing over there?
Well, thanks very much for having me, Andrew. First of all, I think I'll try and avoid the sort of whole COVID issue, because I think that's I think everyone's probably heard enough of that. But I think in terms of the challenges, I started to think about how different it was over here to in New Zealand, and I think the first thing to say is it's a very crowded nation. So I looked at a couple of stats, and I think we have about 280 people per square kilometre, and you compare that to New Zealand, there's 18. So there's about 15 times more people in any given area, and there are obviously more concentrated areas within that, and that means there's both a lot of people connected to services, and a lot of infrastructure already in the ground, which can go back hundreds of years. So crowded country and crowded infrastructure too.
Yeah, wow. That's quite an astounding stat. I mean, we've got some pretty built-up cities, even more than that. Hamilton in the North Island comes to mind, just south of Auckland. In terms of that crowded nation that you talk about, how is the industry handling depth? What's happening in terms of utilities, contractors laying infrastructure at certain depths? Is there a real temptation just to go under everybody else? Tell us about that.
I think it's an issue, I think, everywhere you go in the world, but obviously it's interesting you say about going underneath. I think the temptation is to go on top of, and I think that's where the real worry is. We've got a big broadband rollout coming out, and there's a lot of micro trenching going on, so only going down a very, very small area. Yeah. And you do hear of anecdotes out in the field where there's telecoms in the top level of the tarmac of the road surface. So I think there's less of people going deeper and deeper, but more an issue of going shallower and shallower, and that's obviously a major issue, especially with things that you can't can't locate with standard equipment.
Yep, I'm sure a lot of our locators can really relate to that too. Well, in terms of the government putting money into infrastructure, you've touched a little bit there on the broadband rollout, but is there a huge wave of infrastructure being built, Richard?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's we've produced a report that we look at. We feel that we're on the cusp of a digging boom. There's already estimated to be 4 million excavations in the UK every year, but we think that's going to go higher because you've got the broadband rollout, you've got the electrification of everything almost. It seems of heating people's homes and transport, as well as lots of ambitious investment in water networks too. So just and in addition to that, we've got a big railway project called HS2, and then just to top that off, there's lots of road building schemes too from the Highways Agency. So Highways England. So there's lots going on, Andrew.
We've got a lot of pressure to build houses here, so that creates some challenges. But what's the main focus of the providers over in the UK? I mean, we could assume it's the same the world over, but with that density of population, there's a lot more pressure to keep everyone connected to the tap or the telco or power.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a regulated sector. So the privately owned utilities, so they're regulated, and much of that is focused on customer service. So keeping people connected, and if it's gas, electricity, fibre, water, it doesn't really matter. The regulators are just absolutely insistent on customers keeping connected, and there's been some really good things going on. When you look into the stats in the electricity companies and how many times they have a power outage, how many times the water companies have an issue, it's very, very rare now, and they've done some amazing things. But that's, I wouldn't say wholly due, but certainly largely due to the regulation and the pressure that's puts on those companies. So that's definitely the focus for them.
I know you're a real believer in regulation, or at least regulation supporting behaviour. That's would that be a fair comment?
Yeah, I don't know whether I feel massively comfortable with being a big advocate of regulation. I think it's got to be exactly right regulation. That's where it gets really difficult. And I think you touched on it there, Andrew. Is regulation to promote good behaviour. Rather than saying that you have to do it in a certain way to achieve the outcome, it's regulating to judge people on the outcome, so they can decide how to do it. But actually, the industry benefits when it's the right kind of legislation or regulation. So yeah, so certainly in the right bit. I'm certainly not going to be advocating regulation for everything, though, Andrew.
You're not fully waving the flag there. Hey, Richard, just moving now to getting information about assets and the ease of locating it. How accessible is that information if you want it? And in terms of locating on site, what are some of the experiences and challenges in that area?
Yeah, so it's obviously something that running the service that we do at Linesearch or beforeUdig or LSBUD, it's what we do every day, and the same as yourselves with beforeUdig. Most operators provide information free of charge, so most of the time it's whether they're one of our members or not, is that they provide asset plans to the individual for them to locate themselves, and sometimes they will get a specialist expert locator in, but most of the time that's done by in-house teams. As I say, the vast majority do that free of charge. But the interesting thing we've seen, because we are a big advocate for supplying that information free, but there is now a proven link between supplying information to more people and reduce damages, and that might sound obvious, but that you send your information to more people are aware, less damages result. But it's been a little while since we've been able to prove that, but we've now got that in both water and gas recently, that our members that have joined recently have been able to prove that, which is great.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah. One of the challenges we see in New Zealand is, and hopefully we're moving reasonably quickly into a different space. Often change happens suddenly, but it takes 10 years for it to do that. But we get 4 asset owners arriving, and each of them insists on locating a job, on locating their own assets. So it makes the job quite complex and administratively quite clunky for contractors. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it's just an area of challenge for the contractor predominantly. The teams that are locating, I guess because of the scale in the UK, Richard, a lot of companies already have their own trained and qualified, certified locators.
Yeah, they certainly have teams that have their own people with a cat and Jenny, as it's referred to often over here. It's really interesting when you sort of hear that, because some of our most not, I wouldn't say committed, I can't think that's quite the right word, but the best setups that we see is where that you might have thousands of searches for an asset owner, but they've got processes that the very highest risk ones have one of their team go out on site to help them.
Yeah.
And that very high risk can be, it depends on how many resources the asset owner has, but certainly we see that as a platinum standard to get them to go out and help them locate. But the vast majority of searches and excavations are done with the in-house teams at the contractor surveying and locating, and I think there's been a lot of work done to increase the standard of those locates, but I think there is always going to be a slight difficulty with someone that does a little bit of locating, a little bit of excavation, a little bit of this, where there can be a risk that they're not as qualified as they could be. So I think there's a really interesting balance. I don't know what the answer is, but certainly interesting area that in terms of responsibility and quality and competency of those people locating them on site.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying. There's a spectrum and a range, and you get all types. Richard, what are the standout damage prevention strategies? I know there's no silver bullet, but I guess what's working in the UK, and what has been found to add to what's working?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting you use the word or the term silver bullet. I think in my honest, humble opinion is, I think the problem with our industry is we're always looking for that something shiny and new to solve the problem. It's amazing, certainly in the social media area, that all you need to do is put a picture of a drone up, and it's something new, or maybe it's a headset that's got augmented reality, and that's going to be the thing that changes it. And I think the bit that certainly my personal view is that the best performing teams, unless the contractors, the utilities, and everyone in between, are the ones which follow simple strategies and follow them every time. And they might use some brilliant new kit on their site, but that is only an additional thing to some amazingly simple but really well performed tasks every time. And I think there's certainly a school of thought here that if you can undertake one excavation without incident, and you can do that perfectly by the book, then you should be able to do 2. You should be able to do 20 or 100. And we all know the pressures that are acting against that, whether it be individual team things, or the corporate culture, or simply procurement issues, the financial pressures that I'm sure, Andrew, that take place all across the world. So yeah, I think there's sort of key things for us that we sort of concentrate is that you, as an asset owner, they provide data to everyone that needs it,
Yes.
making sure that's free of charge, and that's something that we're passionate about, because we just don't want someone putting something in the way of someone getting the information. Supporting them through guidance, and as I sort of touched on before, if in certain cases meeting them on site. Simple things, and it really does. It's as simple as this: is that if there's operational call centres at a utility, then they need to know what to say to help people work safely. Certainly in the UK, there's lots of people that don't know about utility networks. They don't know that in some cases that the people they pay for their electricity or gas might not own those assets. They might be going through someone else's. So it's about helping the call centres understand and be able to advise people. But awesome. I suppose all in all, Andrew, just putting yourself in their shoes, putting yourself in the shoes of a domestic customer that doesn't live and breathe utilities every day. They might just have a single job. They might be digging in a trampoline in their garden or putting a new fence up. And it's probably not the first thing they think of. But I suppose that's our challenge: is to make it something that is a fundamental part of the project.
I think you hit on a really important point there. Make your data available, make it free of charge, be there if they need you. But what comes across to me is you're coming alongside the contractor or the person breaking ground or the locator or whoever it is that wants to know about your assets, and you're supporting them through the process. So, yeah, I think that sums it up quite well to me anyway, or a part of it. Hey Richard, I'm really interested in collecting data about damages, because if we know why damages are happening, we can do something about it. But in New Zealand we have very limited data, and this is something that I've pushed that it hasn't yet come to fruition, but I am still hopeful and hope that we one day will be able to collect data around damages that will give us some insights that can prevent future damages. The UK is well ahead of us, along with the US and Canada and other places, and you're going to tell us about USAG today. So really keen to hear all about that, and I'm going to hand over to you now, Richard.
So just go through a little bit about USAG, and in particular the data and reporting side, which is where our interest lies in terms of that sector. So what is USAG? So first of all, it's the Utility Strike Avoidance Group, and it probably does what it says on the tin. I don't think we need to be too creative. It's just there to do everything we can to help people avoid utility strikes. So over 300 stakeholders. Those logos probably mean nothing to you, but it's the utilities industry groups, contractors, people like us, people that don't own assets or do the works, but are a stakeholder in supplying the information to help those works take place. Why? I mean, these I'm sure could be replicated the world over. So this is, this is some in the recent years. So that was in the middle of Birmingham, which is I think known as the second city in the UK. A water leak outside of the main library, but it's on smaller scales as well. There's a restaurant there with an electricity cable was hit. Virgin Media, so the broadband was struck there for residents, and I'm sure if it's anything like here, that the broadband connections have been extremely valuable this year. People there getting evacuated after a gas leak, a swimming pool of human waste. It sounds delightful. And then you can see there, and it's quite interesting. There's people sort of go, oh, well, the water's not as important as electricity or gas. Well, and it's deeper normally. But you can see there that's a fairly big impact. That was in the Midlands, and that's the hole it left. And it can be some serious things, even with the assets you don't think are quite as safety, have quite such a safety issue as electricity, gas, or fuel. So just whizzing through, we've got this what we call the USAG Charter, and you can see I've tried to just highlight the main bits there. So it's about properly planning, assessing all the people that work on a site, carrying out excavations in in accordance with safe systems of work, providing calibrated and tested equipment, PPE, having up-to-date asset drawings, which is obviously where we're focused on, investigating damage, and this is where we'll focus on here. As well as providing the strike information and using what's known as PAS 128, and I'm sure there's similar standards in New Zealand for locating assets, but we can go on to that later on if needs be. So what's it all about? So promoting best practice and safety, a forum for all, and this is a really important point, that it is for everyone. There is no barrier. You don't have to be a statutory undertaker, you don't have to be a utility or a recognised contractor. If you're someone with a spade or a mini digger or whatever you have, and you're going to put a spade in the ground, we want to hear from you and we want to help you. So looking at those systems, having toolkits to help people, having people to make sure they're competent, and then understanding tasks and things that they can do to work safely. And it's interesting that there's work in the UK done on the cost of strikes, and I happy to talk about that. But when we look at costs of strikes, I think we're talking about around £3,000, or £1,000 to £3,000. And interestingly, and again, please get in touch for any further information, but we've had some university studies done where the true cost is actually 29 times that amount.
Oh.
Which is really, which we find really interesting. So how do we do it? There's a website which we ask people to go to, where there's obviously the membership and the charter, best practice toolkits, but also we share information through safety alerts. It is amazing how putting a video of something going bang on social media gets more attention than anything else, which is an interesting area, but it's what we do, because it's one of the things that if we can just raise awareness with one more person, even if it's something that it is showing something going wrong, then it might help someone work safer the next time. And you can see there things like cable strikes in that example. So it comes on to the question there is, why collect data? And you touched on it earlier, Andrew. If we don't know what the issues are, how can we fix them? How can we benchmark where we are? How do we know that what we're doing now over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months or years, how do we know if that's having an impact? If we don't know where we are and if we don't measure what we do. So how do we do it? We have cross-industry participants. Basically, if you've dug a hole in the previous year and have the risk of striking utilities, we ask you to complete the form. If it's a nil return, that's fantastic. If you haven't had any strikes this year, that's great. But it's an ability to benchmark and to measure performance. And we've taken, you touched on the US. We have absolutely copied the guys in the US. We've taken a lot of inspiration from the Common Ground Alliance out there. Of what questions to ask, and obviously they're slightly different because of the different ways the industry works, but certainly those sort of 5 questions: the when, where, what, how, and why. And interesting, some of those are factual, and some of them have a potential bias in them, so we'll come on to that. That's what it looks like. So these are the key questions. So date of incident, the time of day, closest town and county. I'll come on to the geographical bit in a minute. The environment, so whether it is in the road network or in a field, in terms of location type. Asset damaged, what was it that was hit? The asset type, was it a service? Was it a main? Was there interruption? Was the customer affected? What severity was there? What was the cause of damage in planning and execution? And these are areas where, if I'm really honest, a perfect strike request system would say, what are all the causes and what impact did they all have? But we have to try and keep things simple. It's a real balance in getting this information from enough people, but not asking them too many questions. Doing it simply enough that if you're a major contract with thousands of contractors, then you know how to do it. And if you're a small team with 2 contractors, or you're just a one-man band, then you can read this and understand how to do it properly.
Yeah.
And that's critical in our experience. Knowing what equipment is used, the nature of the works, the excavator group, who they were they a contractor, utility, farmer, domestic occupier, and what survey level there was. So yeah, and I think just on the geography, we've always asked for town and county just for a rough idea. That's not always logged, so I think we're going to be going to a grid reference because we can do a lot more with the data with that. There was a concern about confidentiality, about having too granular detail, but that seems to have allayed a bit, and it will allow us to do more in future years. But certainly for the moment, it's just a rough guide of where the strike happened.
Gotcha.
So what does the data show? In terms of volumes, this is one of the things that is probably one of the first metrics, is to say what's the busiest month. So we've taken the line on there is the LSBUD inquiries. So first of all, LSBUD inquiries are generally done on average a week before the excavation. So some of them can be 3 months in advance, some of them can be on the same day, but on roughly a week. So they're a fairly good barometer of what's going on across the in industry on a month. And as you can see there, this was in 2019. This was the most recent strike data we have. That line across the top shows LSBUD inquiries. And what we're really looking here doesn't really matter on the scales on either side, but the gaps between the line and the bars. And you can see there that July is the one which nearly touches the line, and from that we were able to show that actually July is the busiest in terms of strikes reported. Not just because there's more strikes there, but actually there's less of a gap, so it's the riskiest month, and that's happened consistently. The summer months have been consistent in terms of strikes, and that might be because there's longer working hours, but there certainly seems to be a correlation between having, maybe it's holiday cover, maybe it's having different gangs on site, but if I'm really honest, it doesn't really matter what the cause is. I mean, it's great to come up with a big bang solution for the whole industry, but the reality is most contributors will have different reasons. But if we can just make them aware that July is more risky, then that's our job done. There we are. Strikes by weekday probably doesn't cover. It probably looks relatively straightforward in terms of what you might expect. And again, we sort of, when I remember seeing that for the first time, or that there's not sort of one massively higher than the other. You're kind of a bit disappointed you've got nothing amazing to report, but actually that gives credence to the figures if it looks about what you'd expect. And as you can see there, and you can I won't go through all the commentary. The report's free to download, so I won't go through it all. But you can see there fewer works on the weekend, so fewer strikes. Perhaps it's jobs where you're assessing sites on Monday and you're starting excavations on Tuesday. But it could, if you're doing a job every day, that doesn't fit your profile. So again, it's about showing an overview industry trend, but allowing people to focus in and look at it on their sites or across their gangs. This one is an interesting one because you can see there that there's you can't help but think of COVID when you're talking about peaks and whatnot. But you can see that initial peak up at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's a bit of a worry because there's not that many works going on in there. They are emergency reactive jobs by and large. You can see, so we'll come on to that in a minute, but it sort of dips down and then is a bigger peak across the working day, which again you'd expect. Peaks in first thing in the morning and then around 12 o'clock ish. So between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. is our biggest area.
Yes.
But then we sort of correlated that with the severity, and as you can see, low, medium, and high there. And what we took from that was actually, if you look at the red bars and you look at how many works are taking place, whether that's sort of 2 o'clock in the morning area, okay, the bar's only at sort of 40 or 50, but the red bars are pretty high in proportion of that. So yes, there's definitely a higher risk of having a high risk strike in that time of day. So just this area here. So that's certainly one to think of if you're an emergency reactive gang where they might not be able to get the same records or they might not have the same processes. Actually, those guys are at high risk, and that's so. This is the sort of stuff that we can take from these reports, and it helps raise awareness across the industry, and that's certainly what we're interested in. And then again, there's a lot of information on here, but looking at the asset damage versus the equipment used, and I'm sure, I don't know how you're going to be viewing this, but you probably won't see all those different colors. I'm colorblind, so it really isn't a good graph for me. But what we take from these things is saying, that one there, the biggest bar on that one is a low voltage electricity being struck by a hand tool, and that's where you kind of go, ooh, this is serious, because actually this combination, and we actually did another one that said where it was, but the biggest risk was a hand tool striking a low voltage cable in the footpath. And so
if you're working with a hand tool in the footpath and you're working between 11 and 1 a.m., your chances just multiply, don't they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly that. So and obviously being on a hand tool, you are closest to the asset, and the danger there is so much higher. So something there that everyone can take something from. The why bit's really interesting, but I'm just personally, I'm slightly apprehensive about listening too much to the causes, because you have to recognize that people are submitting these damages information, and they are telling you why it happened, and sometimes them telling you that they might not have had the full investigation, they might not know why it happened. It's very easy to say where something happened or what was hit, but actually having an unbiased view of why something happened, it could have implications for them. It might be the culture of their company is terrible, and they're forced to do things at a very low cost. And so that's why I'm always a little bit nervous about relying too much on why someone said something's happened. But you can certainly see they're not following procedure is a high one, and insufficient survey practices. And this is at the execution stage, and that sort of comes back to our original sort of mantra, and then in that actually, if you just follow the procedure that's there and established, you can really avoid strikes. And this is stats to help support that sort of principle. So just coming towards the end now. So in terms of challenges, it's getting the data. We don't have regulation. We don't have anything to sort of enforce people to submit the data. And there's a real challenge between that balance between getting someone to send in enough information for it to be useful, but not making it overly difficult for them to compile it. We're hoping to put that into a database. We at the moment we've just last week asked for 2020 data, but we're hoping for that for next year, or for this year, is to have that on a database so that people can upload it themselves. And again, the other one there is about location of works, because what we'd love to do, and I've touched on it before about saying about the town and county, if we can have that on a grid reference, then we can link that with the searches made and the inquiries made, understand exactly where those strikes are happening, and also link it back to the original ticket or inquiry, so that the next time someone searches, we can look at what happened for a previous damage, and then the next time they do that combination, or if it's that when someone searches the next day they're at high risk, we can preemptively know that they're at high risk and help support them to minimize the risk of damage.
Richard, I think that's a really salient point. You're getting into predictive analytics and to some degree, and creating a warning metric where you say, look, these guys are 5 to 7 out of 10 possibility of hitting. They're working at this time, so on and so forth. So
exactly,
yeah, that's critical.
Yeah. So just to sort of wrap it up, and I appreciate it's a brief run through, but I hope that's of interest. USAG is there purely and solely to reduce strikes. We make it free to join and support it. It really does need content from all to share best practice. So those safety shares, they come from all our members, and that's the way we get good engagement across the industry. I probably would say this, being in the data and reporting group, but sharing the damages data is key to know whether it's working, whether what we're doing is working, or what we need to do. We love getting in touch with international colleagues because it gives a different perspective. There are different working practices, different regulation, different population densities, but we all have pretty similar issues, and we always look for inspiration of what we can learn. And I mean, Chris, the last one there is fairly salient. What we do will reduce how many people get seriously injured, and that's a pretty good way to wake up on a morning in our experience.
I want to thank you so much, because what you've shared is so valuable to us as an industry, and you've given up your time. So I really want to thank you for getting up early, engaging with us, and sharing your experience from the UK. Thank you very much, Richard.
No problem, Andrew. Really pleased to be talking with you.